For the drama of life is like a puppet show in which stage, scenery, actors, and all are made of the same stuff. We give them power, quietly yielding control, our silence, their throne. If we are in a relationship, you have to give me everything. 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 Tipping point. Our show is titled Power, No Power. Mike Boyle pretending to be in the reins. And in spite of this daunting title, I have a clear goal to make this show as uplifting as possible. But first, for clarity's sake, let's discuss the different types of power in lieu of that positive message we want to bring. The first one that we know quite well is titled legitimate power, which means that you have been appointed or anointed or prescribed as being the person who has the last word. And this type of power is probably the one that we are the most familiar with. Or maybe not. Let's move on to the next one, which would be coercive power. And we've seen this quite often, that those that have legitimate power, if they feel that the title alone is not enough, or if they do not feel that they are truly in power, then they will reach towards other means. And coercive power is obviously one of those, most predominant in fact. Do as I say, or there will be harm. So let's move to some of the lighter definitions. One being an expert power, we know those individuals who are truly well versed in whatever the subject may be. And their power, their authority lies in their experience. There's a close definition to the expert power, but I believe this is a bit different, and that would be called informational power, which is one that I have seen quite often, that people feel that they are powerful because they know something that you don't know. But the fact is that one doesn't last very long. That eventually that informational cat gets out of the bag, and whoop, all of a sudden that power is gone. looking at our external motivators, those that primarily are the drivers of most people I run across, at least. We're very familiar with the idea of the power of reward, meaning that if you do something, then you get a goodie. And we know if the external motivators are in full throttle, that there is that flip side of the reward that's always lurking behind the corner, and that would be the coercive. So you do what I want, and you get a reward. If you do not do what I want, then you will be punished. And the last of our definitions concerns what we call referent power. And referent power is talking about those individuals that are natural leaders based upon the way they treat others, the way that they move towards things, their honesty, their integrity. Trust plays a very important role. And in spite of all of that, of what we have been conditioned, tied to power, those individuals that we claim have all this power, I'd like to argue that the true power that we have is based on honesty, based on trustworthiness, based on integrity, based upon that assistance that we provide towards others. And we have a number of people within our society that have that type of power, but because they are not the ones that are leading our businesses very often, there are some exceptions. They are not the ones that are leading our governments, very few exceptions. But because we do not see them in those predominant places, we think, well, it doesn't really matter. But the fact is that it's these individuals that are willing by nature to help others. These are the ones that we should put up on a pedestal, but not too long. Power reigns supreme. We acquiesce, we allow, tolerate its hold. So is power something that we control? In other words, denoting who has power and who doesn't? I'd like to think that we have more to say about the question than we often recognize. That we have a free choice in that who we dispense power to. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, who's asking me? And who holds the power? So what would happen if we were either individually or collectively to say that they hold no power? We have plenty of examples. They might not necessarily show up every day, but we clearly have those examples. If we were to collectively decide that we were not to acquiesce to the directives of our government, wouldn't that be a statement that they do not hold the power over us? What about the boss in a company who hands out a directive and nobody adheres to it? Wouldn't that be a way for individuals to say, you have no power over me? Because we always think of power being relegated to either one person or a collective, a small collective, that we tend to forget that we are consumed with this subject of power. Aren't we daily confronted with the question of power? I'm going to give you a obtuse example that might sound funny. Let's say you and I are walking on the sidewalk. You're coming from one direction, I from the other. And let's say that the sidewalk is rather narrow and there are other people on the sidewalk. And so we have to be very judicious in the way that we manage our toing and froing on that sidewalk. So you're coming towards me, and I'm coming towards you. And it's almost like we're playing a game of chicken. Because the question is, who is the first one who is going to renege? Who's going to move out of the side so that the other person can come through? And if you never thought of that particular incident as being a question of power, then I ask you to dwell on that. And often the lack of courtesy and respect is a way for others to emit power in their own way. Is it really power? No. Do we make a decision, going back to that example I gave about the sidewalk, do we make a very cognitive decision that this is not worth fighting about, and so if they insist on showing how powerful they are, that actually our acquiescence has nothing to do with a real power that they emit. Very often, I can imagine that a number of people cannot imagine their lives without having to flaunt some sort of pseudo power because they're working with some sort of mega complex. Because let's be honest, if you feel good about yourself, then there's no need to play such games. Lately, I've been focusing on one topic that I've run across quite often, especially in the online world, of discussions that are taking place and this need that we have, especially males, of dominating the airwaves. And I perhaps might be the last person who could actually raise this subject. But if we believe that admission is the first step towards recovery, and if we believe that this idea of perfection is not one that we will ever achieve, and we know that in self-forgiveness is the first step in building that world that we want to live in, then I admit that being confronted with this idea, confronted is a strong word, I think just being made aware is a better description. Is a way to reflect and perform some sort of introspection. And it gives us an opportunity to think about how we emit power in ways that we never were even aware. Here I've been focusing on the individual. We do this in a collective way as well. And there was a case that took place, I believe, took place over a longer period of time, but more or less came to a pinnacle last year, concerning an artist that I never really thought of too much about because I didn't really care for her work. But let's leave that one to the side. We're talking about a human being, and here I'm referring to Britney Spears, who was put up on a pedestal at a very young age with all kinds of fame and, of course, the power that's tied to the fame. And following the adage, put them up, knock them down, which seems to be a ritual that we have within our society. So we put these individuals on a pedestal that they didn't ask for, not even going down that avenue whether they deserved it or not. Really immaterial. Because we are the ones, if we agree that we are the ones who elicit power, that we acquiesce to others, and with that they have the power, then we also understand that we are the ones who can take that power away. So what happened with Britney Spears? Very young, tremendously under pressure. I don't even want to think of how I would react had I been in her situation. Did a lot of foolish things. I don't know about you, but I've done plenty of foolish things, and I'm very thankful that I was not put on a pedestal so everybody could see how foolish those things actually were. And it all became a reinforcing loop. The more they focused, they being us, we collectively focused on the foolishness that Britney Spears was undertaking, the worse the situation got. So it became a feeding frenzy to the point of where Britney Spears' father was given custody to not only those things that she had earned, but basically her overall rights. We're talking about an adult who was ripped of her adulthood, and this was allowed to take place within the courts. And basically, she was held out of the limelight. Career fell apart. Nobody knew what happened. But there were some who were concerned and started a movement because they looked at Britney Spears as being a prisoner, and they started the campaign, Free Britney Spears. And I would have never known anything about all of that, what took place, due to a lack of interest. But found the process at that point to be very interesting. And in fact, Britney Spears was allowed to defend her case. And she was very open. She was very articulate. And obviously she was very convincing, because that control that was bestowed to her father from the courts was then lifted. So we look at this question of power, no power. We see that someone who was really thrust into a situation, being an entertainer as a child, gaining notoriety, gaining fame, gaining riches. And as soon as we put that person on the pedestal, the first thing we started thinking about doing was sawing down the pedestal and putting that person in the rightful place. And so we decided collectively. Can you think of examples within your day-to-day routine of where some sort of power play is taking place? I would say within all relationships there is some sort of power play. Now, we always think of the dramatic, and here I'm referring to the subtle. Those subtle things that we do, those things that we say in passing, our body language, those interactions that we have with each other are all reflecting some sort of power arrangement. And of course, this can go back and forth, as we know within a relationship, that within certain realm, one person will have power, and within another realm, the opposite side would have the power. And this can continue to interchange. And that's the way it is, and I think that we have to accept it as such. And of course, we have those others where there is no give and take, that one person is superior and the other person is subservient. And those are the ones that we are continuously confronted with the repercussions within our society. The most notable being femicide. So am I referring to some sort of predetermination that we're going to have people that are naturally going to hold the power and those that are subservient? Subservience is also a choice. Depending upon the degree in which we're talking about the subject. But if you choose not to count on your own rights, or defend your own rights, better said, then that's a choice too. All obviously easier said than done. But if we say that that referent power, the one that I referred to in the beginning of the show, is really the one that we want to strive for. So how do we ensure that that power that's been entrusted to us stays healthy? Well, following the idea of understanding true power and as a referent power as being tied to helping others, being concerned about the welfare of others, promoting the well-being, especially those who need the most defense. Then there is one type of leadership that I believe helps not only in ensuring that that power is used in a positive way, but also performs a check in ensuring that that power does not go to our heads. And the one that I'm referring to here is called servant leadership. And if you think about it, the concept is not new. The concept is one that we have seen throughout the ages. But the actual definition as such is a relatively recent phenomena, I would say about 50 years old. And there was a gentleman by the name of Robert Greenleaf who actually termed the phrase, and it was all tied to this idea that those individuals, the true leaders, are the ones that see their leadership being in the form of serving others. And I'm sure you could probably think of a number of examples of individuals that we have in our society that perform such activities. And very possibly, we do not necessarily always look at them as being leaders, but they are. If you think about it, they are ensuring that as many people as possible within our society feel empowered to do something important. And so, by being a servant leader, you remove the impediments for those people in order for them to make a difference. In other words, maybe perhaps if I give you some examples might be best. Either people are confronted with some sort of self-doubt, so you act as a motivator. Perhaps maybe they might be missing certain knowledge, and so you assist them so that they're able to overcome that knowledge gap. Perhaps there are others that are standing in the way of those individuals so that they are not allowed to flourish. And so we actually remove those physical impediments. And by performing such actions, our leadership is through the examples that we set and I was about to say putting these people in front, but actually that's incorrect. They put themselves in front. We just help them to do that. Because by saying we're putting them in front, that means that we have the power to do that. And we don't. We do not have that power. Only individuals can claim that power for themselves. Only individuals can feel empowered. Only individuals can find that path. All we can do is help them along the ways, because that's all part of the free choice as well. You are listening to Radio Tipping Point, and our show today is titled Power, No Power. Mike Boyle at the controls. Power like a flame. We acquiesce and allow, tolerate its burn. There was an author by the name of Matt Richtel, came out with a piece not too long ago titled Young in Love and Sharing Everything, Including a Password. And he talks about the power relationships among young adults. And this was one that I wasn't familiar with, although it doesn't surprise me at all that a sign of endearment that we currently have within our society today is the ability to hand over pieces of information that, in effect, could make us very vulnerable. And the idea here is by performing these actions, allowing ourselves to be in that vulnerable state, is that sign of affection and our commitment towards others. Whereas of course, really none of the above. By forcing others to perform actions that leave you vulnerable, it's a pure power play. So Richtel says, given the right situation, your power is not just in your ability to love, but also to annihilate. When the relationship goes sour, the password becomes a weapon that is used to perform a character assassination. Speaking of pieces of literature, there was a book that I went through recently that wasn't necessarily the impetus of the show, but played a very important role. It's a professor from UC Berkeley by the name of Dr. Keltner, who came out with a book titled The Power Paradox. And in fact, some of his sayings in this book really did get me to think a little bit about the role that those in power actually hold, where that power is to be derived from, and looking at the title, The Paradox, meaning that the power that we have can be thrown overboard, and that's another decision that we make due to the hubris that we receive from others, and the inability to stay humble. And Keltner's point was that The rise of power actually shows the best in human nature. That's Keltner's point. And at the same time, shows the worst in human nature. Thought it was a very interesting concept. And if we look at the word empowerment, obviously, if we feel good about ourselves and we do not need the external acknowledgement that very often is the driver, as I often say within the show, that empowerment is a prerequisite for us to truly achieve an inclusive society. But all that being put to the side, we do have this dance that we perform tied to dominance, those being dominant and those being submissive. And often it's based upon our own individual interpretations. And sometimes it's all tied to how much we trust ourselves in actually being transparent and open. There was a interesting experience that I went through a number of years ago. I was working for an organization and went to a dinner. This was somebody who had been a boss of mine at one time. In fact, was much higher within the organization, so I guess superior clearly, but not a direct superior. And there would be certain things that I would never say to this individual for fear of not just being out of line, but understanding that relationship. And so I'm at his place, and his husband was talking about various things, and then all of a sudden I saw this relationship taking on different forms that was truly fascinating to me, because his husband was saying things that I would never say. And this boss just stood there and listened, and I saw within my boss this vulnerability that I had never seen before, and that was truly fascinating. And in retrospect, when I think about the story, it only proves to me that the power is something that we allow, and it's not consistent. It can fluctuate wildly and have a lot to do with the actual subject per se, the relationship that we have to each other, the conditions in which all of this is taking place. And very often, our own vulnerability, the vulnerability that we feel. Eagerly sought power. Mere mortals crave its sweet taste, lost in one misstep. I'd like to go through some of the points that Keltner talked about in his book. Go through these points relatively quickly because I see that there's, as always, there's never going to be enough time. His first point is power is about altering the states of others. And going back to that of what I was referring to at the beginning of the show, that let's concentrate on this concept of servant leadership and that we have the ability to improve the lot of others. And our power is to be found within that ability to make a difference for others. And among others, other points, I think this is what Keltner is really talking about. And if we were to expand on that one a little bit and look at this concept of what we call hidden champions in our societies, those individuals who are truly the stars do not necessarily receive that recognition. And that's another point I alluded to at the beginning of the show, that we have people with power that do not receive any type of acclaim. They do not receive those accolades. They do not crave those accolades. And in fact, I would even argue that they would most prefer to stay in the background, remove themselves from the limelight for fear of all of that getting in the way of the good actions that they want to perform. And very possibly, and I never even thought of this before, that by taking on this aura of non-notoriety, let's put it that way, that it's almost like a self-control or a control mechanism so that they ensure that they remain humble, really. That's pretty much it. And this power that we have can be managed on different levels. One of them that I believe very strongly in is that of the arts, either in the spoken word or very possibly from music or painting. Or maybe even in the way that we are able to perform those actions, our day-to-day actions, in a selfless manner. That we have the ability to move others in those simple things. Keltner also believes that this power is ubiquitous. It's all tied to the relationships that are to be found within human beings, always. So there are some of the positive points, and the book is called The Power Paradox. So let's move on to some of the more negative points. And you could even look at these points as following levels of power entropy. Power leads to empathy, deficits, and diminished moral sentiments. Meaning that once that power has been achieved and you are basing a number of your actions on that actual power per se, that a certain amount of sensitivity becomes lost, and through that, that natural empathy that we should all have as human beings becomes not necessarily lost, but it becomes camouflaged, and we're not capable of seeing it anymore. Keltner also mentions that power leads to self-serving impulsivity, and that we perform different actions that are solely to our favor. His next point is that power leads to incivility and disrespect. And here comes the narcissism. Power leads to narratives of exceptionalism. Mirror, mirror on the wall. So we talk about where power can be derived from. We talk about how the demise can be inflicted. So we're concentrating on those individuals who have the power or lose the power. What about the other side? What about the individuals who are powerless? Keltner says, stress defines the experience of powerlessness. That powerlessness is very stressful. Lack of control. Could be a lack of personal control, lack of control of the situation. And I would even argue the feeling that your external needs to be controlled. And taking that one step further, powerless undermines the ability to contribute to society. And we see this quite often, that many of us are tied to our day-to-day activities so much, our current struggles, that those struggles zap us of all energy and in fact act as a means by which we become powerless. I had a conversation with an individual yesterday, and I was trying to raise the point that we have no reason to complain, as there are others that are in a much worse situation. I'm not quite sure if I think he did understand it, but he was focusing on those individuals who clearly are not in the best of situation, those people in our society that feel powerless, and he was alluding to our current milieu tied to inflation, tied to the negativity that we are hearing every day, tied to the helplessness that we are prone to feel. And in fact, we're really talking about powerlessness. Fierce battles of might, power gained through blood and sweat, lost with a misstep. Like I said, this is supposed to be a positive message. So what is the positive message here? I'm in the 2-minute warning, or close to the 2-minute warning here, so I better get moving. Well, positive message number one is that in spite of our powerlessness, in spite of our self-doubt, in spite of all the bombardment of information, or so-called information, that we are being confronted with daily, if we see ourselves as being free individuals, and that freedom is something that only we can bestow upon ourselves, then you have to come to the conclusion that we do have a choice. That choice is not always comfortable. That choice will not automatically lead us to happiness. That choice is the ultimate power that we have. And it's the power that most people feel they don't have. But if we felt that we had it, that could be a game changer. And then, of course, the ability to look past the interaction that's taking place and the ability to say, this has nothing to do with me. This does not affect me. I do not acknowledge it. I do not acknowledge it. I do not acknowledge it. But I do acknowledge that the show is almost over. Thanks again, as always, for letting me indulge. Wish you all a wonderful week. Find the power.